Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome once again to grecochess, a YouTube channel of chess. We continue covering the games of the final round of the Underwater Moonlight Tournament. This is a tournament that started a few months ago. The organizer is one of our subscribers, Zanilor from Italy. 81 players started in the first round in 9 groups of 9, among them Zanilor and myself. At this point, after 3 qualifying rounds, we are in the final round, where 6 players have advanced. One of them has withdrawn out of the 6, so the other 5 are competing for the championships. And they are Maxim Govorukha from the Ukraine, who was also the second placed in the Greco chess tournament that I organized some time ago. MMT from Indonesia, pigio74 from Italy, TsiNanFu from Greenland, and Steam Rocket from Australia. They'll play a total of 20 games, 5 times 4, 20. 8 of them have been concluded. I have covered 6 of them until now, and now it's time to cover the 7th. I covered them according to the order that they were concluded. And after that, the next video will be the 8th game. And then, if there are no more games, we'll return to the chess.com bots, facing the chess.com bots. But for now, we're going to have the game of TsiNanFu versus pigio74. In the previous video, pigio74 with the white pieces defeated TsiNanFu that had the black, and now it's the other way around. TsiNanFu has the white and pigio74 has the black. But let's first share the screen with you. And if you haven't seen the previous videos and you wonder what's happening, first we are only going to show a part of the screen because we don't want to spoil it. Had we shown the entire screen, you would have seen the next few moves and the final result. Also, you may notice that the position that we are showing on the screen is not the regular position from which a chess game starts, meaning rook, knight, bishop, queen, king, bishop, knight, rook on the first and eighth rank, and the pawns on the second and seventh. This is because this tournament is what's called a thematic tournament, meaning the players have agreed in advance a starting position that is different from the standard one. It's as if the players have already played 6 moves and they've reached that position. The ratings. TsiNanFu with 1479 is well above pigio74 that has a rating of 1281, but in the previous game when pigio74 had the white pieces, in spite of the rating difference he won. Let's see what's going to happen now. What else can you notice? On this bar that you see here, the computer will show its evaluation of the position. If you see a number at the bottom left on the white half, it means that white is doing better. And then by the top left at the black half means that black is doing better. What else are we going to see? A green arrow will indicate which move the computer would have considered as the best. And outside the part that we're showing, but the part that I can see, are the comments of artificial intelligence coach. And if they are interesting and relevant, I'm going to read them. But TsiNanFu has the white pieces, pigio74 has the black, and TsiNanFu is going to start the standard way. If you push your pawn to g3, what is your goal? Your goal is fianchetto, bishop to g2. Bishop to g2 for white, for TsiNanFu, and exerts pressure on this diagonal here that you see from a8 to h1. And of course you notice that if the knight was not on f3, the rook on a8 would be lost. That is why pigio74 tries to block it. Most players try to block it by sending the pawn to d5, but pigio74 has a different idea. Instead, he pushes the pawn to c6. These both are book moves. You see that little book here? It indicates the fact that players are following opening theory. These book moves are standard moves of the opening theory and should not catch anyone by surprise. Let's continue. TsiNanFu is going to place his knight to his c3. Excellent move that you see here, the thumbs up, that's what it means, but not the best. The best would have been queen to c2. What pg74 is trying to do, of course, develop his knight. Most times the difference between the best and excellent is minuscule. It doesn't really matter. Pawn to d5 for pg74 to block the diagonal again with a second time. Diagonal, of course, from a8 to h1. Knight to e5 for TsiNanFu places his knight at his opponent's half of the board. If you can keep your knight there, it's going to be wonderful. It's not yet an outpost because there's a pawn on f7 that, if the knight on f6 would move, could go to f6 and challenge the knight on e5. Bishop to b7 for pg74 that wants to share this long diagonal, basically telling his opponent, Mr. TsiNanFu, if you have your bishop on g2, I'm going to have mine on b7. Let's see who is going to prevail. Now pawn exchanges on d5. First TsiNanFu takes it and then pg74 takes it. And we completed the first 10 moves. And until now, if you look at the bottom left, TsiNanFu is leading with 0.5. That means almost nothing. Short castling for TsiNanFu and pawn to b5 for pg74. Well, you get a little bit more space. You have some control of the a4 and c4 squares, but it's more or less it's an unnecessary move. The pawn creates also weaknesses on a5 and c5. That is why the computer thinks it's an inaccurate move. That's what it means. If you see the orange circle with a question mark followed by the exclamation point, this means inaccuracy. And let's continue. Pawn to a3 for TsiNanFu, another inaccuracy. Unnecessary pawn moves. Knight to d7, pg74, an inaccuracy as well. And this, I'm not even sure why. The coach says this is not the right idea. Thanks, coach. But what is the right idea? That's what you don't tell us. It seems that pg74 develops his knight and challenges the knight on e5. Computer would rather have another pawn move. You see the green arrow, pawn going from a7 to a5. Maybe to challenge the b4 square. Let's continue. Pawn to b4 for TsiNanFu, another inaccuracy. This allows the opponent to force doubling of pawns, says the coach. The best option was to attack a pawn chain by sending the pawn to e4. Maybe that would also give more space to the queen. Short castling for pg74. Rook to c1 for TsiNanFu, another inaccuracy. The better move was to attack a pawn chain, says the coach, and wants the pawn to go to e4 and challenge the d5 pawn. Pawn to a5 for pg74. Finally, the computer has a move it considers the best. And the coach says this threatens to capture a pawn and win material after the follow-up trade. So let's see if this will happen. Pawn to e3 for TsiNanFu strengthens the pawn chain f2, e3, d4. Also gives some space to the queen that is on d1, but blocks the bishop on d2. The coach says that this permits the opponent to force doubling of pawns. The best option was to attack a pawn chain. Once again, the pawn should go to e4, not to e3. And pg74 grabs the b4 pawn. Just a good move. That's what the checkmark means. It's less than the best or an excellent move. But the coach has a nice comment that taking that pawn will win material after all is said and done. We finished 15 moves and pg74 now is ahead by 0.6. Let's continue. We exchange on before pawn takes and bishop takes. Knight to e2 for TsiNanFu, inaccurate move. And computer wants the knight to go to e4. You may be wondering, let's see it now. Won't this cost a knight? Not really, because if the pawn, let's see, let's do it better. If the pawn takes a knight, then bishop takes bishop and attacks also the rook. But if the knight goes here, if instead of the pawn, the bishop takes the bishop, then the knight can come back and win the bishop. So knight to e4 is not losing material, I'm not sure white is better. Also, there is interaction between the knight on e4 and knight on f6. The computer, in any case, does not like this move, knight to does not like knight to e2, and wants the knight to have gone to e4. Push your pieces forward, as they say. And now we have the exchanges on d2. Inaccuracy again. Too many inaccuracies have you seen? And TsiNanFu thinks he can win a pawn by taking the pawn on c6 and attacking the queen on d8. Mistakes is a computer. Would rather have the queen take the bishop, and let's see what's going to happen. First, bishop takes on c6. Rook takes on c6. Bishop goes back to a5. And you've seen here that a black, meaning pigio74, is a piece ahead. And you see the +3 here. Knight to f4, so this idea of taking the pawn on c6 was a bad idea because TsiNanFu lost a piece. And knight to b8 for pigio74, that attacks the rook on c6. The computer thinks it's just a good, would rather have the rook go to c8 and exchange rooks. We finished 20 moves, and by now pigio74 with an extra piece is leading by 2.2. Let's see how game continues. Rook takes on f6. It would be wonderful for white if only the pawn on d7 could take it, because you lose an exchange, but at least you open your opponent's king. But now queen takes on f6. That was the free rook. And now the advantage of pg74 is +5, an entire rook. Knight to d5 for TsiNanFu wins a pawn. Instead of +5, pg74 has only +4. And attacks a queen, so queen has to move somewhere. Queen goes to d6 and threatens the knight. Knight goes to f6 with a check. Inaccuracy, says the computer. The knight should have been saved by pushing the pawn. Queen takes on f6. You see the numerical advantage material of pg74 is +7. It starts becoming very strong. Well, some compensation for TsiNanFu is that he grabs the rook on a8 with his bishop. Knight to c6, that's why the compensation now just 0.2. Bishop to b7 for TsiNanFu, and rook to b8 for pg74. We finished 25 moves. The material advantage of pg74 is just +2, but the computer advantage is 3.8. Starts becoming important. Let's see how game continues. I think we jumped a little bit. Yes, first the bishop takes the knight on c6, then the queen takes the bishop. Pawn to d5. So TsiNanFu is hoping that his d pawn may threaten promotion and either get promoted or win material to be stopped. Queen to d6 stops the pawn. Ideally, you want as light piece as possible to block your pawn. A knight is the ideal. Since there are no knights, a bishop would have been a good one. Definitely not the queen. You don't want the queen to perform this role. Pawn to e4 for TsiNanFu. By the way, now the d pawn, the d5, is passed pawn, very dangerous, and that's protected passed pawn. The e4 pawn protects d5, but can it do anything? Let's see. Queen to queen to e5 for pg74. If pawn goes to d6, then the rook has to go to d8. The pawn goes to d7. The queen will go back to e7, and the pawn will be stopped slightly. Let's see. That is why. Let's see what could happen if TsiNanFu went for pushing the pass pawn. 1, 1, 2, 2, and now the pawn cannot be saved. And the queen would stay on e5 and block the pawn e4 from continuing. So that is why TsiNanFu doesn't try any of this. Instead, he sends his queen to d3. Then the pawn that was under attack and had no defender sees the coach, meaning the e4 pawn. Queen to e8 for pg74. Would rather have the queen go to c3 and have a exchange of queens. But pg74 was rightly concerned about the protected pass pawn on d5, wants to stop it as early as possible. Pawn to f4 for TsiNanFu that wants to have his three pawns next to each other, F, E, and D, helping each other. Computer thinks that's inaccuracy. I'm sorry, thinks it's a good move, but not the best. This is a fair move, says the coach. It opens the diagonal that pg74 will find to check with his bishop. Computer doesn't like it too much, thinks it's inaccuracy, would rather have the pawn be pushed to b4. We finished 30 moves. The score until now, pg74 is leading by 3.0. It starts becoming important. King to g2 for TsiNanFu. And bishop to c7 for pg74. Pawn to d6 for TsiNanFu, that is hoping that his pawns, especially the d pawn, might go near promotion, either get promoted or win back some material to avoid promotion. Bishop to d8 for pg74. Pawn to e5 for TsiNanFu. You see the wonderful chain h to g3, f4, e5, and d6. Let's redo it again. This is the chain. h2, g3, f4. Let's show them the pawn. h2, g3, f4, e5, and d6. 5 pawns next to each other. A very strong chain and not easy to be attacked. Usually you attack a pawn chain at the basis, which is h2, but the king is next to that. So materially, pg74 is ahead by +2, as you see here, but this chain could become very dangerous for TsiNanFu. And pg74 replies the check with a queen from c6. King goes to h3. Queen to c4 goes for exchange of queens. Since he's ahead material, why not? If queens are exchanged, both sides have a rook. pg74 has a bishop, but TsiNanFu has one more pawn. 5 versus 4. But the 5 of TsiNanFu are parts of a wonderful pawn chain. pg74, 3 of them are next to each other at the starting point where the b5 is a passed pawn. Who knows what can do? The rook is behind it. Let's see. Queen to f3 for TsiNanFu, and queen to e6 with a check for pg74. We completed 35 moves, and the advantage of pg74 is 3.2. Will this be enough to give him the game? Pawn to g4 for TsiNanFu that wants to start pushing the pawns. Pawn to b4 for pg74 that hopes his own pawn can go near promotion. Queen to e4 for TsiNanFu. Pawn to b3 for pg74, 2 squares away from promotion, and unlike the d6 pawn that has in front of it the bishop on d8, next to that the queen on e6, and also nearby the rook on b8, while also the d6 has no piece to protect it. The pawn on b3 is no piece in front to stop it, and the rook at b8 behind it to protect it, but no pawns next to that. Let's continue. Pawn to f5 for TsiNanFu attacks the queen on e6, and the queen goes to h6 with a check. pg74 queen goes to f6. King to g2 for TsiNanFu. Queen to d2 now for pg74. Rook to f2 for TsiNanFu, trying to answering the check and also threatening the black queen at the same time. Something else you may notice that the queen on e4 also covers the promotion square of b1. That is important. But now the black queen goes to b4. There's a reason why, because you want to have, first of all, you want to save your queen. And then you want to have double protection for the b3 pawn. If it goes to promotion, yes, the queen can take it, but the black queen gets a white queen. But TsiNanFu makes a mistake. Sends the queen to d5, most likely to help the pawn at d6, but by doing so, is not exerting any pressure on the b1 square. But before that, we finished 40 moves, and what is the score? pigio74 is leading by 3.6, and after this mistake, the difference becomes 18-7 at this point. If pigio74 plays accurately in 7 moves, he has checkmated his opponent. And accurate, let's see what it means. What the computer wanted is a queen, white queen instead of d5 to exchange the queen, but still the material advantage would win quite a lot. But let's see what's going to happen now. The queen goes to g4 with a check, wins the pawn for pg74, and now we're talking about 6-move checkmate. So this was the correct first out of the 7 moves. King to f1 for TsiNanFu, and you see here the white flag in the red circle. At this point, TsiNanFu realized it was hopeless and resigned. This means that pg74 has defeated twice TsiNanFu, both with the white and with the black pieces. And this means also that the chances of TsiNanFu become very limited after now. And this concludes the coverage of the 7th game. But now, before we conclude the video, we are going to show to you the computer evaluation of the entire game. Let's see what does the computer have to say about the entire game. And let's share the screen once again. And here we are. With the computer, pg74 had accuracy of 87.9 versus 77.2 for TsiNanFu. And also, pg74 played as if his rating was 1950, way ahead of this 1281, while TsiNanFu played as if it was 1300, a little bit less than his 1479. In the various categories, how things are going. No brilliant moves, no great moves, one book move each of them. Best, 34 for TsiNanFu versus 16 for pg74. Excellent, 8 versus 7 for TsiNanFu. Good, 6 versus 5 for pg74. 5 inaccuracy, 5 inaccuracies for each of them. 3 mistakes for TsiNanFu. And that was it. This was a summary of the game, and let's see now what is next. We have one more game. The next game is going to be between the two players at the top, Maxim Govorukha versus AMMT. The first game, Maxim Govorukha had the white pieces and won, and now let's see if AMMT can challenge and win back, or if Maxim Govorukha will have another win, or if it's going to be a draw. That is the next video we have in store for you. And after that, it's time for the bots. Let's once again look what's happening with the bots. We have completed facing the beginner and intermediate bots. There are 20 advanced. We have completed 14 out of these 20. Now it's time for the 15th, which is Charles from England with a rating of 2000. Let's see what will happen there once we continue with that. But that's all for this point. Once again, we want to thank all the subscribers. If you have not subscribed, please consider doing so, and you'll be notified of the games once they are published. Thanks also to all of your viewers that are watching them. Some of you, I believe, are very faithful. And I hope you enjoy them and you like them, but most of all that we learn. because there are so many lessons, every move, every game, what the players did wrong, what they did correctly, so we don't repeat their mistakes and we can emulate them in their great moments, in their great moves. Thanks, of course, to the likes and the comments. In addition to these long videos, we have our short videos, 3 minutes. The puzzle rush with the 3 minute limit. How many can we do in 3 minutes? Try to play against us. And of course, while watching, you have the luxury to pause and try to see if you can do the same puzzles. This is the Greco Chess channel. I'm your host. My name is Charilas Aniziris. To all of you, goodbye.